Hello, I'm Anika from Made to Sew. In today's class, we're going to be starting a new series, and I'm going to be showing you how to draft and then sew a tie neck halter neck top with a trapeze style shape. This garment is perfect for summer, but also evening wear. I'm going to be showing you how to make it in a top version, but you could easily lengthen it and create it in a dress. The fabric that you choose, whether you're working with a fabric that has more drape versus more structure, will give you a different look and feel. The blue fabric that I've used is a silk cotton blend. In today's class, we're going to be focusing on the pattern drafting. So you're going to want to work from a bodice block pattern that fits your individual figure. If you don't have access to one of those, then you can use a basic pattern such as my Copen pattern. Again, ideally you would fit this to your individual figure first. So grab the pattern that you're working with and we can get started. As usual, for these pattern drafting videos, I'm going to be working with my half scale bodice block. Your block might look slightly different to mine, but I will talk through the differences as we go through this tutorial. My bodice block has approximately 4 centimeters, 1.5 inches of ease at the bust, waist and hip. My pattern is half scale, but the measurements that I share with you will be full scale. We're going to begin by working with the front pattern. So I'm going to separate my front and my back. Now the first thing that you're going to want to do is to decide on what we do with the darts. This pattern has clearly detailed a dart at the shoulder, the armhole and the bust, but your pattern might simply have one dart at the side or potentially in the shoulder. Let's discuss each area. In a halter neck garment such as this, we don't want to have any extra ease across the shoulder. So I'm going to be removing my shoulder dart. If you have a dart in the shoulder, you simply want to remove all of it to ensure that your shoulder measures the same size as your individual shoulder. Cut along one of the dart legs at the shoulder, cut along one of the side dart legs, and rotate the shoulder dart into the side dart. Tape the shoulder dart closed and redraw the shoulder. In order for a sleeveless halter neck garment to fit well, you are most likely going to need to remove a dart at the armhole as well. I have this recorded on my pattern, so I know the size of the dart that works best for me. But I would recommend that you need to be taking a dart in approximately this size, depending on your cup size, in the location of the front armhole notch. Of course, the best method is to create a sample and to check the fit, to ensure that it's not gaping in this area. Now the shoulder and the armhole are going to be fitting your body quite well. For this garment, you could choose to keep a side dart, or you might want to remove it. I decided to remove it, simply from the design perspective. But if you have a fuller bust, you may choose to keep it. To remove the side dart, I'm going to cut up the central line of my waist dart, or a line drawn down from the bust apex parallel to the center front, and along one of the side dart legs that connects to the bust apex, to separate this side piece of the pattern. I'm then going to take this side portion of the pattern and raise it, ensuring the cut line in the center of my waist dart is always parallel to the center front, raising it until the side dart is completely closed. Now we can draw across the waistline because the waistline is actually accurate with the side of the pattern. And I'm not going to be using my waist dart in this pattern because of course it is a loose fit. Once you've managed the darts of the pattern, the next thing is to work on the neckline and the shoulder. You want your garment neckline to be fitting quite close to your neck for the tie to work. So depending on where the neckline finishes on your block or the pattern that you're working with, you may wish to raise it. I chose to raise my center front neck by 5 millimeters or 1/4 inch. I also chose to extend my high shoulder point towards the neck by 3 millimeters or 1/8 inch. The other adjustment that I made was to lower the high shoulder point by 3 millimeters or 1/8. This helps to create a snugger fit in this area because this is a halter neck garment. Use a French curve to redraw your neckline. Moving on down the garment, I chose to lower the underarm, and I decided to do this by 2 centimeters or 3/4 inch. Because this is a halter neck top, you might also want to reduce the ease in your garment here. When considering how deep you drop your underarm and the ease that you're choosing here, do make sure that if you're planning to wear a bra with this garment, that the side of the bra will be covered. I decided to remove the ease in my pattern, so I removed 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch. If you don't want to take that much to start with, you could use a lesser amount and decide on the fit in your sample. Once you're happy with the placement of your underarm and the ease that you've chosen, you can then connect in the halter neck shape of the garment. Ensure that you have a nice flat section for a generous 1.5 centimeters, 5/8 of an inch at the side seam of the underarm. Then connect in a soft curve the underarm point up to the high shoulder point. Now we're going to work to add the volume into the hem of this garment. And the technique that I show you here is something that you could use if you're wanting to draft a trapeze-style garment, even a sort of swing coat. It's going to be fitted in this very upper part and then flare out. Begin by drawing the cross front onto your pattern. Now the cross front can be positioned approximately midway in the armhole from the underarm to the neck, or if you're looking for a measurement, approximately 3 inches, 7.5 centimeters down from the center front neck. It doesn't have to be exact, and you can choose the location of this. You're going to want to measure the cross front from the center front to the edge of the armhole. Divide this measurement by 5. Take the cross front divided by 5 measurement and position this from the center front along the cross front towards the armhole and mark. You will then take this measurement and times it by 2, measuring from the marked point across the cross front towards the armhole and mark again. The final gap between the edge of the armhole and this marked point should measure the same. The cross front divided by 5 times 2. Basically, we are dividing the cross front into 5 parts, 2 whole parts and 1 half part. This is because we are working on half of the front. The center front of the garment will be connected to another side, creating another part that measures the same. Moving down to the hem of the garment, we're going to do the same thing, and this will then allow us to distribute the fullness evenly across the garment. The first thing that you need to do with the hem, though, is to decide on the hem length of this garment. The true hem is in line with the side seam hem. Square the side seam hem across to the center front. We will discuss if you want to use this longer hem at the center front later on. So I'm going to lower my hem at the side seam and therefore all the way across by 2 centimeters, 3/4 of an inch from my block, which is finishing at my lower hip. You can choose to extend the side seam hem as well if you wish to add more ease there. But of course, we're going to be adding ease in the pattern here, so that's not necessarily needed. Measure the hem of the garment from the center front to the side seam. And once again, divide the figure by 5. We will be copying the same method that we used for the cross front. I will measure from the center front towards the side seam the hem measurement divided by 5. My next measurement will be the first measurement times 2, and then I should have the same distance remaining from the last mark to the side seam. Once you've drawn this, you can connect your points from the cross front down to the hem. To give ourselves a pivot point, we're going to measure down from where these lines connect 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters, down from the cross front towards the hem. We're then going to draw a line back to where the cross front is connected to our new armhole shape. I've done that in a different color for you, one in red and the other in green, so that it stands out. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our scissors and cut from the hem along one of these lines. I recommend that you do one line and then the other. When we reach the pivot point, 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters below the cross front, we will cut along that angled red line towards the armhole. We then need to cut from the outside of the paper towards that armhole to create a pivot point, approximately 1/8 of an inch, 3 millimeters of paper attached at that armhole. This will allow us to open up the hem of the garment. And I'm going to be using some pattern drafting paper to fill in this insertion. In the cut line from the hem up to the cross front, I added in 9 centimeters or 3.5 inches into mine, and you want to measure this on that new hemline. Next, we can work on the second line. We will cut from the hem up to that pivot point and then across on the angled green line to the armhole. We don't need to cut in from the outside of the paper again because we've already done that. So we already have our pivot point at the armhole. And then I will work to add in some more paper in this insertion. I use the same insertion on both, so 9 centimeters, 3.5 inches. And then you can work to tape your pattern down as you need to, on both the front of the pattern as well as on the wrong side of the pattern, trimming away any excess paper. To finish this pattern, we're going to finalize the side seam and blend in our hem. Now for the side seam, I connected from the underarm point where I'd reduced the ease down to the new hem at the side seam, 2 centimeters 3/4 of an inch longer than my low hip, without changing the ease at this point. Now, one thing that you will need to consider with your length is whether you want to incorporate the length of the original front bodice. Now, because we removed the side dart in the pattern, we effectively removed the length of the garment over the bust, because the side seam hem is now what is accurate. However, if you have a fuller bust, you might still need the length over the bust. And if you don't add this, your finished garment might look too short at the centre front hem. In terms of how much to add, you might not need to go with the original centre front hem that you see here. What I recommend is that you measure the side dart of your block and you lower the new hem by this amount. My side dart measures 4 centimeters or 1.5 inches. I will be lowering that new hem 2 centimeters 3/4 of an inch below the side seam hemline by this amount. The reason that our current low hip for the front is longer than this is because we rotated other darts into the side dart, which increased the size. The size of your original side dart should be the size that you need for your individual bust volume. Square off your new hem at the centre front and also square off your hem at the side seam. Then you can use a French curve to connect both of them. I would also recommend you use a French curve to blend the armhole where we cut in to add those insertions. Feel free to add the grain lines to your pattern. You can have one grain line that is parallel to the centre front, and this could be a cut on the fold option. You could also choose to cut this garment on the bias grain line, which is 45 degrees to the centre front. Now we can move on to the back of the pattern, starting at the back neckline. Now I did not need to raise the centre back of my neckline, but you may choose to depending on where that finishes on your block or the pattern base you're working with. I do, however, need to do exactly the same as what I've done for the front at the high point of the shoulder. I moved my shoulder closer to the neck by 3 millimeters or 1/8 inch, and I also reduced the shoulder at the high shoulder point by 3 millimeters or 1/8 inch, reconnecting the shoulder in a straight line and drawing in the back neckline curve. Now we are going to ignore this back shoulder dart. It doesn't matter whether you have one in your pattern or whether you don't, because it won't be affected by the new armhole we draw for this halter neck. At the underarm, we need to do the same thing that we did for the front. I lowered my underarm by 2 centimeters, 3/4 inch, and I reduced the ease by 1 centimeter, 3/8 inch. I chose to lower the hem from my low hip by 2 centimeters, 3/4 inch. You need to do exactly the same as what you did at the side seam on the front. Draw in the armhole shape for your halter neck from the high point shoulder down to the underarm. You can also choose to connect the side seam if you want to, as that won't change, from the underarm down to the hem, with no extra ease added to the hem. Now we're going to add our insertions into the back in the same manner that we did in the front. The first thing is that you want to draw your cross back line. This can be approximately halfway in the armhole between the neck and the original armhole base of your bodice block. But again, you could choose to vary this line depending on where you want your insertions to be added. Measure the cross back from the centre back to the armhole and divide this by 5. You will then take that measurement and measure from the centre back towards the armhole and position a mark. Next, you will times that measurement by 2 and position a second mark. You should then have that same distance from the second mark to the armhole edge. Remembering, like with the front, we have one part at the centre back because this will be connected to the other side of the centre back. We need to do the same thing at the hem. Measure the hem and divide it by 5. Measure from the centre back towards the side seam that figure. Times the figure by 2 and measure again towards the side seam. From the second point to the side seam should measure the same. Connect the lines from the hem up to the cross back. Measure down from the cross back on these lines 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters and draw on an angle to where the crossback line intersects the new armhole of your draft. I'm going to draw mine in a colour so that they stand out. Red for my first line and green for my second line. Cut up the line from the hem to the pivot point and then on the red angled line towards the armhole. Leave a small amount of paper attached at the armhole. You will also need to cut from the outside of the paper towards the armhole to create that pivot point. Approximately 1/8 inch, 3mm of paper still attached. Take some pattern drafting paper to fill in the gap of your insertion. I use the same insertion size in the back as what I did in the front, 9 centimeters, 3.5 inches, measured between the lines of the new hem. Tape in position. Then you can work for the next line. Cut from the hem up to the pivot point and then on that green angle from the pivot point to the armhole. You won't need to cut from the outside edge of the paper again because you've already done this. Your armhole should pivot nicely. Grab a new piece of pattern drafting paper, open your insertion and add in what you need. I use the same 9 centimeters, 3.5 inches. Tape down the work as needed. Use your curve to read true and blend the armhole edge where you've pivoted. Of course, we're ignoring that waist dart for the centre back. The final thing that we need to do is to blend in our hem. You want to keep the join at the centre back hem nice and flat for a good section, as well as the side seam hem. And you can use your French curve to connect this, creating a nice soft curve. It doesn't matter if you miss your original 2 centimeter lines slightly. You may also wish to raise the side seam of the garment, especially if you're making this into a longer garment such as a dress, because if you cut this garment with the grain aligned with the centre back, this side seam will be on the bias. Usually I would raise my side seam in those situations by 1/4 inch, 5mm, up to 1.5 centimeters, 5/8 inch, depending on how long the garment was. The final thing for the centre back is to add a notch for the opening. I measured down 16 centimeters, approximately 6.25 inches, and we will position a notch here. This top section of the back pattern will be left open. Now, although I have an option for a shaped centre back seam in my pattern, I'm going to keep my centre back seam straight here. You can add your grain lines. You could have a grain line parallel to the centre back, or you could choose to position this on the bias and cut it on a 45-degree angle. The final pattern that we need to create is a pattern for the necktie. Begin by measuring the neckline of both the front and back pattern pieces. Using the edge of a tape measure, record those measurements. Start by drawing a long rectangle, one straight line, and find the center of this straight line, which is going to be your center front. Square off the long line to create a center front. You can draw the necktie as one full pattern piece, or it can be cut on fold at the center front. I'm going to be drawing one full pattern piece because I plan to cut my necktie on the bias. The width of my necktie is 13 centimeters, 5 inches. Measure the width along the center front line and then square another long line, which will be the other edge of your necktie. Find the measurement for the front neck written on your pattern and measure from the center front that front neck measurement and position a notch. If you're working with a full pattern piece, you will do this either side of the center front line. Then take your back neck measurement and measure this from the first notch, positioning another notch. You now have notches that clearly mark the shoulder point as well as the center back of the garment. The next step is to continue the rectangle from the center back notch out for the length that you want. I decided to work with 70 centimeters, 27.5 inches from the center back notch on either side of my necktie. Extend the rectangle lines, square off at the end of the measurement that you choose, and connect the top of the rectangle. Let me add in some of the measurements so that it's nice and clear for you. So I have my front neck measurements, my back neck measurements. Yours will be individual to your pattern. Then from the center back to the edge of the necktie is 70 centimeters, 27.5 inches on either side. The width of the necktie is 13 centimeters, 5 inches. Of course, you will need to add some seam allowances to this. The necktie can be cut using the bias grain line, or it can be cut with a straight of grain parallel to the center front, or alternatively to the long edge, or you could have it with the centre front cut on the fold. As a design detail, this garment has a hemband on both the front and the back in the outside exterior layer. I positioned my hemband 17 centimetres, 6 3/4 inches up from the hem of the garment. Measure following the exact curve of the hem to ensure that the hemband is an equal distance all the way around. This will also be completed for the same distance on the back of the pattern. Now this garment has a lining, and I want that lining to be slightly shorter than the exterior fabric so that it's not visible from the right side. I recommend measuring up 2 centimetres, 3/4 inch to 2.5 centimetres, 1 inch. Again, following the same shape of the hem. Again, this takes place on both the front pattern and the back pattern. Often when I'm drafting a lining pattern, I will make the lining slightly bigger at the side seams. However, for this particular pattern, I'm planning on lining the garment with the exact same fabric as the exterior. If you're planning to use a lining material, you may wish to add 1/8 inch, 3 millimeters to your side seam. We will, however, take the favouring on the lining pattern so that the lining at the armhole is ever so slightly smaller. I recommend working with a 1/16 to 1/8 inch, 2 to 3 millimeters. Again, this happens on both the front and the back pattern. And we're not going to do this around the neckline because we have the necktie. Once you've drafted all of the pattern pieces, we're going to work to trace them out from our master pattern and add our seam allowances. Using a piece of pattern paper, I'm going to record the details from the master pattern. You're going to want to add your seam allowances around these pattern pieces. I'm working with 1 centimetre, 3/8 inch, and record the grain lines as you go. Let's work to chat through the pattern pieces that you should have traced out. In our exterior fabric, we should have a front, a back, a front hem, a back hem, and also a necktie. Now the front and the back will have been traced out stopping at the hemband line. They should have 1 centimetre, 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around, except for the centre front if you want to cut it on the fold. The centre back is not cut on the fold, it is cut on the straight of grain, and I have incorporated the notch for the back neck opening. These pattern pieces could be cut on the bias if you prefer that look. You will also have a front hemband and a back hemband. These are both cut on the fold for the centre front and the centre back, and have a 1 centimetre, 3/8 inch seam allowance the rest of the way around. The lining pattern pieces were traced from the master pattern using the green lines, incorporating the favouring and the reduced hem. They have a 1 centimetre, 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around, except for at the centre front where this pattern is cut on the fold. The back pattern has a seam allowance and it is cut on the straight of grain. There is also the notch marked for the neck opening. Again, you could cut these pattern pieces on the bias if you prefer. For the necktie, I cut out the full necktie because I'm planning on cutting mine on the bias. It has a 1 centimetre, 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around. Make sure that the notches are clearly marked on your necktie. It can be a good idea to add a centre front notch onto the necktie as well. You are welcome to true your pattern pieces, checking that the front and the back will connect to the necktie properly, as well as truing the rest of the pieces as you need to. And there we have it, your finished tie halter neck top. Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this class, and I hope to see you next week where I'll be sharing step by step how to sew this top.